taking on extra shifts, selling handmade crafts, and saving every coin she could. But no matter how hard she tried, her relatives never saw her effort. At every gathering they would laugh at her, call her useless, and say she would never achieve anything. At a family party one evening, the mockery became louder than ever. Her uncle, holding a glass in his hand, burst into laughter and said in front of everyone, "Akinyi, you will never own anything. You'll die depending on others." The room erupted with giggles, her cousins whispering and smirking. Akinyi sat quietly, her calm eyes scanning the room. Instead of arguing, she reached into her bag and pulled out a neat folded envelope. The chatter continued until she stood up and gently placed the papers on the table. "You say I own nothing," she said softly, her voice steady. "But this is the deed to my apartment, paid in full. My home." The room froze. The laughter died instantly. One cousin leaned forward, eyes wide, reading the bold letters at the top of the document. Murmurs spread quickly. "She bought a house. Is this real?" Her uncle's face turned red, his words stuck in his throat. For the first time, silence filled the room, not because she was useless, but because she had proven every single one of them wrong. Shame washed over their faces. Akinyi simply sat back down, sipping her drink, no longer the target of their jokes, only their envy. In Kampala, Miriam had always been the quiet one in her family. She worked hard behind the scenes, doing small business deals, selling produce and saving carefully. But her cousins never respected her. They loved to mock her, calling her dead weight, saying she would never stand on her own 2 feet. Every time she walked into a gathering, whispers followed her, and every insult cut deeper. But Miriam never fought back. She just kept working in silence. One evening at her brother's birthday party, the teasing reached its peak. The room was full of music, laughter, and clinking glasses. As everyone gathered around the table, one cousin cracked a cruel joke. "Miriam will always live off others. She could never own anything of her own." The whole table burst into laughter. Some pointed, others nodded in agreement. Even her brother tried to cover his laugh with his hand. Miriam sat still, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had heard these words too many times. Slowly, she rose to her feet, the laughter still ringing around her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Without a single smile, she slid the papers across the table. The laughter died as curiosity took over. One cousin unfolded the papers, his smile fading instantly. His voice cracked as he read, "Deed farmland, Miriam's name." Suddenly, the room grew silent. Everyone leaned closer. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was prime farmland outside the city, acres of it, worth more than any of them had imagined. Miriam finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "While you laughed at me, I was building something real. This land is mine, paid for by my own work." The cousins stared, their faces burning with shame. No one dared to speak. The same people who had mocked her just minutes earlier now looked small and guilty. Even her brother's smile disappeared, replaced with regret. For the first time, Miriam stood taller than all of them. She didn't shout, she didn't insult them back. She simply gathered her envelope, sat down, and sipped her drink. The silence in the room was louder than all their laughter had ever been. Miriam had turned their mockery into her victory, and they would never forget it. In Lagos, Amaka had always been the target of her family's gossip. While her cousins chased wealthy suitors and boasted about flashy lifestyles, Amaka chose a different path. She worked hard, running a small business, saving carefully, and living quietly. But her family never saw her discipline as strength. Instead, they mocked her for not marrying a rich man. To them, she was wasting her youth and going nowhere. At her cousin's engagement party, the insults returned, louder than ever. Music played, glasses clinked, and people danced. But in one corner of the hall, her relatives surrounded her. One cousin sneered, "Amaka, look at you. Still single, still struggling. You're useless." Another chimed in, "If you had married a rich man, maybe you'd have something by now." Laughter erupted around her, their words sharp and cruel. Amaka stood there, her heart steady, her lips curling into a small smile. She didn't argue or defend herself. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek brown envelope. Calmly, she placed it on the table. "You think I have nothing," she said softly, her voice cutting through their laughter. "But this says otherwise." A curious cousin grabbed the papers and began reading. Suddenly, the smirk on his face vanished. This is a deed," he stuttered. "A house in Victoria Island." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward Amaka. Phones quickly came out recording the moment. Gasps echoed across the table. Owning a property in Victoria Island was no small thing. It was wealth, security, and success all in one. The same relatives who mocked her now looked at her with shock and disbelief. Amaka's smile grew wider, but she didn't boast. She simply said, "I may not have married rich, but I built my own wealth." Her words landed heavy, leaving everyone speechless. Even the bride-to-be stared in awe, realizing that Amaka had achieved what most of them only dreamed of. The music still played in the background, but the energy had shifted. The whispers turned into murmurs of respect. For once, no one dared call her useless. Amaka had turned their laughter into silence, their mockery into envy. She sat down gracefully, her dignity shining brighter than the party lights. While cameras captured the moment, the useless girl became the star of the night. In Accra, Efua had carried the weight of her siblings' insults for years. They called her lazy, a burden, and a failure. Whenever she tried to speak about her plans, they laughed at her dreams. She worked quietly, building her small business from scratch, but no one in her family believed in her. To them, Efua would always be the useless one. That Christmas, the family gathered around a long decorated table, the smell of food filling the air, laughter echoing through the room. But once again, the laughter turned against Efua. Her eldest brother smirked and said loudly, "Efua, tell us, how does it feel to live such a failed life?" Her sister added, "Maybe one day you'll actually achieve something, but not in this lifetime." The whole table roared with laughter, pointing at her as if she were a joke. Efua sat quietly, her face calm but her heart burning. She had endured enough. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a large envelope. Without raising her voice, she placed the documents on the table and said, "You call me a failure, but maybe you should read this first." Her brother grabbed the papers carelessly, but his smile disappeared as his eyes scanned the page. This is a deed," his voice cracked. "An office building. In your name." The table went silent, forks froze mid-air. One by one, her siblings leaned forward, their eyes widening. Efua owned an entire office building, something none of them had ever achieved. Their laughter vanished, replaced by shame and disbelief. Efua finally spoke, her tone steady and firm. "While you mocked me, I was working. I built my company from the ground up. And now that building belongs to me." The room stayed silent, the Christmas cheer replaced with heavy regret. Her siblings couldn't meet her eyes. The same mouths that had called her useless now trembled, unsure of what to say. Efua leaned back in her chair, a small smile on her lips. For the first time, she wasn't the one being laughed at. She was the one holding power. The burden they had mocked had become the success they envied. That Christmas dinner would be remembered forever, not for the food or the music, but for the moment Efua's truth silenced an entire table. In Lusaka, Chipo had always been the one her family looked down on. She worked long hours, managed her money carefully, and lived simply, but her efforts were never respected. At every gathering, her relatives made jokes about her. They called her useless, saying she had no future and no achievements. Still, Chipo stayed quiet, never arguing back. At the big family reunion, the insults came again, louder than ever. Her aunt, who loved showing off, raised her voice so the whole room could hear. "Chipo, you are so useless. At your age, what do you even have to show?" Laughter spread quickly. Her cousins leaned toward each other, whispering and snickering, some even clapping at the insult as if it was entertainment. Chipo sat still, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She let them laugh, let them mock, her calm eyes moving from face to face. But inside, she knew something they didn't. Finally, she rose from her seat, her voice steady. "You think I have nothing," she asked softly. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a neat envelope. The room quieted a little as she laid the documents on the table. Curious hands grabbed them, eyes scanning the bold letters. Silence fell. "This is a deed," one cousin stammered. Another gasped. "Not one, 3 rental houses. In her name." The mocking smiles disappeared. The same mouths that had just laughed at her now hung open in shock. Chipo stood tall, her presence filling the room. "While you mocked me, I was building my life quietly. Those houses bring me income every month. I don't depend on anyone." Her aunt's face turned pale, her earlier confidence gone. Cousins who once sneered now mumbled apologies, suddenly trying to change their tone. "Chipo, we didn't mean it like that," one whispered. Another reached for her hand, trying to smile, but Chipo only looked at them calmly, her silence saying more than any words could. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had proven herself with actions, not arguments. That day, the family reunion changed forever. No one would forget the moment Chipo revealed the truth. The useless girl they laughed at had become the one they now envied, and as she sat back down, sipping her drink, it was clear. She was no longer the one seeking respect. She had already earned it, and they all knew it. In Kigali, Nadia had always been treated as the weak link in the family. No matter how hard she worked, no one seemed to notice. And mocking laughs from relatives who believed she would never amount to anything. To them, she was the useless one, the girl with no future. At her cousin's wedding, the whispers grew louder. As guests danced and laughed, Nadia could hear her aunts and cousins murmuring behind her back. "Look at her, she has nothing," one said with a smirk. Another added, "At her age, she should have built something, but she's still empty-handed." The words stung, but Nadia kept her head high, her calm expression hiding the storm inside. Later in the evening, as the music slowed and the room grew quieter, Nadia decided she had heard enough. She stood up, her voice soft but strong. "You keep saying I have nothing," she began, and the chatter died down, all eyes turning to her. "But maybe you should know the truth." From her small handbag, she pulled out a crisp envelope and held it up. Carefully, she unfolded the papers and placed them on the nearest table. A cousin grabbed the document first, his eyes widening as he read aloud. "Deed, downtown Kigali. A cafe space? In your name." The room went completely silent. Forks paused midair. The same family who had mocked her seconds ago now looked stunned, their smiles frozen. Owning prime property in the city center wasn't just success. It was power. Nadia looked around the room, her voice steady. "While you mocked me, I was working. And now, I own a cafe space in the heart of the city. I built it myself." There was an awkward shuffle. Some relatives tried to clap, their faces tight with forced smiles. A few muttered congratulations, but the shame on their faces was clear. The girl they had dismissed had already surpassed their expectations, and their pride couldn't handle it. Nadia didn't wait for their approval. She simply gathered her papers, sat down gracefully, and sipped her drink. The power had shifted completely. For once, the whispers stopped. The useless one had proven she was far ahead of them. And that wedding night, everyone in the family realized Nadia was no longer the girl they could laugh at. She was the woman they would have to respect. In Dar es Salaam, Zainab was always the quiet one in the family. She never boasted about her plans, never showed off her hard work. Instead, she kept to herself, focusing on her job, saving carefully, and making smart moves that nobody noticed. But because she didn't talk much, her siblings and relatives assumed she was going nowhere. They teased her, calling her unambitious, saying she would always depend on others. On her father's birthday, the whole family gathered. The room was full of laughter, music, and the smell of food. But as the cake was brought out, the attention shifted to Zainab. One brother chuckled loudly. "Zainab, at your age, what have you even achieved?" Another cousin smirked. "She'll probably ask for money again tomorrow." The laughter rolled across the room, everyone joining in as if mocking her was part of the celebration. Zainab sat still, her eyes calm, her lips pressed into a small smile. She had listened to this same joke too many times. But this time she was ready. As the laughter died down, she stood up slowly. Since today is about celebrating, she said softly, maybe I should share my gift too. She walked to the cake table and placed a neat envelope beside it. The family watched, confused, until her sister reached out and unfolded the papers. Her eyes widened, her voice trembling as she read aloud, "Deed land by the ocean. Zainab's name." The room froze. Jokes turned into stunned silence. Everyone's eyes shifted to her, disbelief painted on their faces. Oceanfront land in Dar es Salaam was priceless, an investment far beyond what any of them had. Zainab finally looked around the room, her voice firm but calm. "While you laughed at me, I was working quietly. I don't need anyone's money. I already own land by the ocean, and I built it with my own effort." Her brother's smirks vanished. Her cousin's whispers faded. Suddenly, the same family that had mocked her began calculating in their heads just how valuable her land was. Some tried to clap, others muttered congratulations, but the shame on their faces was clear. Zainab didn't boast, she didn't rub it in. She simply collected her papers, sat back down, and smiled faintly. That day, the power in the room shifted. The unambitious sister they laughed at had become the one they all envied, and her father, watching quietly, looked at her with new pride in his eyes. In Johannesburg, Lerato had always been the target of her brother's cruel jokes. Growing up, they made her feel small, always comparing her to themselves. They laughed at her choices, mocked her quiet lifestyle, and loved reminding her she was nothing. Even as an adult, the insults never stopped. No matter how hard she worked, her brothers only saw her as useless. At a big family party one evening, the teasing reached its peak. Music filled the hall, glasses clinked, and everyone danced. But when the laughter died down for a moment, her brothers decided to make her the joke of the night. They raised their glasses high, chanting loudly, "To Lerato, the useless one." The crowd chuckled, some cousins joining in, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or not. Lerato felt the familiar sting in her chest, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she stood slowly, her calm eyes meeting theirs. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. With steady hands, she unfolded the paper and held it up. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You call me useless," she said, "but this says otherwise." Her eldest brother grabbed the paper with a mocking grin, but the grin disappeared as soon as he read it. His voice dropped. This is a deed." Another brother leaned over his shoulder, his eyes widening. "A shopping complex. In her name." The room went silent. The music seemed to fade into the background. A shopping complex in Johannesburg wasn't just property. It was power, wealth, and status. The same mouths that had been chanting now hung open in disbelief. Lerato looked around, her voice steady. "While you mocked me, I was building something real. That shopping complex belongs to me. And it earns more every month than your words could ever take away from me." A heavy silence filled the hall. Some guests clapped awkwardly, others lowered their heads in shame. Her brothers' faces burned red, their arrogance collapsing in front of everyone. Lerato didn't gloat. She simply took the deed back, folded it carefully, and placed it in her bag. Then she sat down, her dignity intact, sipping her drink as if nothing had happened. That night, the celebration changed. The jokes stopped. The chants died. Lerato was no longer the useless sister. She was the woman who owned more than all of them combined, and they knew it. In Dakar, Aminata had grown used to being pushed aside. At every family gathering, she was treated like an outsider. Her relatives whispered about her, calling her a burden, mocking her quiet ways, and laughing at her dreams. She worked hard, but because she didn't brag about her efforts, they assumed she had achieved nothing. At her cousin's graduation party, the hall was full of music, dancing, and cheerful chatter. But soon the spotlight turned cruel. As Aminata walked past a group of relatives, one of them shouted loudly, "You'll always be nothing." Laughter erupted across the room. Some cousins clapped, others pointed, and for a moment it felt like the whole hall was laughing at her. Aminata stood there, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had heard those words all her life, but tonight she was ready to answer. Slowly, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded envelope. The laughter continued until she lifted the papers high for everyone to see. "I may look like nothing to you," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hall, "but this proves otherwise." The room quieted as curiosity took over. Someone near the front snatched the papers, scanned them, then froze. His voice trembled as he read aloud. This is a deed. Aminata owns a farm. Her name is right here." The laughter stopped instantly. Gasps filled the air. Phones came out, recording the moment as silence spread through the hall. A farm of her own, land, crops, income, was more than most of them had. The useless girl they had mocked had just proven herself in front of everyone. Aminata looked around, her eyes steady. "While you laughed at me, I worked. That farm is mine. I built it with my own hands." Her words landed heavily. Relatives who had been laughing seconds ago now shifted in shame, their eyes avoiding hers. A few clapped awkwardly, trying to save face, while others muttered fake congratulations. But the damage was done. Their cruelty had been exposed, and their pride shattered. Aminata folded her papers carefully, slipped them back into her bag, and sat down with quiet grace. She didn't need to shout or boast. The deed had spoken louder than anything she could ever say. That night, the videos of her moment spread quickly, and everyone would remember the scene forever. The moment Aminata, once called nothing, silenced a whole hall and became everything. In Harare, Rutendo had carried years of hurt in silence. Her family never missed a chance to remind her that she was useless. Every gathering turned into a stage for mockery, and she swallowed the pain, never letting them see how deeply it cut. At a family dinner one evening, the insults came again. Her sister leaned back in her chair, smirking, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Rutendo has no future. She'll always be useless." The table erupted in laughter. Cousins giggled, uncles shook their heads, and the sting of shame hung heavy in the air. Rutendo stayed calm. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a plain brown envelope. With steady hands, she slid the papers across the table. "If I'm so useless," she said quietly, "then maybe someone else should read this." Her brother unfolded the papers, his laughter dying mid-breath. His eyes widened as he scanned the page. This is the deed," he whispered. "To the house. Our parents' old house. In your name." The room froze. Gasps echoed around the table. Her mother covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. That house had once been the pride of the family, but it was lost years ago. No one had managed to get it back, except Rutendo. Tears rolled down cheeks. The same people who mocked her now struck with shame and awe. Rutendo's calm voice filled the silence. "While you laughed at me, I worked to bring our home back." That night, the useless sister became the hero, and no one at that table would ever look at Rutendo the